What does it take to get beyond the damage of words? I'm Katrina Collier. Join me each week as I explore what it takes to step into a happier future. My guests are sharing their stories of when they realised that they needed help and what it took to take that first step, so that you leave inspired and maybe even start on your own path to self-love, care, compassion, and of course happiness. So without further ado, let's hear their stories. Patrick Mullarkey, welcome to Beyond the Damage of Words podcast. And I have to thank you, which of course anyone listening is not going to know, for washing your hair.
I'm so glad you led with that.
Totally had to be done. It's looking fabulous.
I'm so grateful I mentioned that before we came on the podcast.
I was thinking all morning, I have to mention that. Yeah, but that's the kind of lighthearted podcast it is, even though with serious topics. Speaking of which, what led you into healing? We don't muck about here. We just get on with it. What led you into healing?
So what led me into healing, I suppose, was frustration and annoyance at being limited by my previous circumstances, and I suppose accepting some limiting beliefs about myself, about my role and in life in general. And then
what made you realise they were limiting though?
So I suppose there's two things.
You do the work and work that out, right?
Yeah. I suppose there's two things. The first was kind of a couple of life events, like one at work specifically, where I was like affected by just exposure to a specific part of like my general trauma from childhood. And then prior to that, where I'd gone through some counselling previously, a couple of rounds, to talk about it. And it's interesting. There's a great phrase I heard in the context. It was in the context of sport, kind of psychology and management. It's like, you never arrive. You never arrive. The idea being that kind of yourself, you're a work in progress, your team, the stuff, the expertise you're trying to build out. But what I hadn't realised, I suppose, with the first round or go around with my kind of counselling and the help I got was I was very binary and immature in terms of my thinking. And it's like my late 20s, I remember it as a kind of, done my course, done my stint, and that was fantastic. I got such value from that. Fixed. And then it was, and how naive, how full of privilege and entitlement that view was at the time. But what I realized, a lot of
people have that view though. So it's not an unusual view. You think, oh, well, I've done that. I'm fixed now.
Yeah, I think
maybe that's hope.
Yeah, I think there's, I've got like what do you call it, preference, a bias, an assumption on this. I think in like, especially in Western cultures, there's two things at play there. One is we don't talk about trauma, especially men. We're not encouraged in terms of our archetypes, successful archetypes, one form or another, to talk about trauma. I think that's changed a little bit, which is great. Yeah. But also, people have trouble dealing with anything that's grey. So, like I say, a binary input-output is easier to process and understand versus, say, something that's a bit more fluid. And people get strength from certainty. And sometimes, in terms of our personas and how we're feeling about life, that's not always feasible, visible. And what happened with, like, I suppose the life event at work is like, I realized, wow, actually, there's stuff here that I still carry around as baggage that perhaps might be in some form or another always there. What do I want to do with this? Because it's provided an anchor in the spaces I'm in a way that I don't want anymore, but I accept it might be. It's kind of like that check-in luggage when you get that cheap flight and you're like, I've got to check this in. I have to pay for that, but I didn't even want to bring it. Okay, fine, whatever. But I'm going to dump this stuff at the airport once I get to the other side. So
it's because it's a certainty. You're used to carrying it. It's familiar. I want to hold on to it.
Yeah.
So I remember that when I first started the work, and it's like there's almost this reluctance to let go because, you'll have a void. Yeah, you will. And it's wonderful. And you fill it up with love and light instead of heavy. But maybe that's it. Maybe it's this certainty of I know where I'm at.
And the truth is as well, like, and we talked a little bit about this in passing before we came on, is the stuff that served you to get you to your point in life, that
Yeah.
to achieve positive things as well. Like we talk about being solution orientated and how that comes out in our work.
Yeah.
That you also, there's a moment of truth and terror where you're like, hang about. If I deal with some of these things I want to, does that mean those strengths, those overplayed strengths, actually end up in the bin as well? Yikes. Like, who am I then? What am I? What do I do? Like, and so you kind of like a through the looking glass moment, you kind of end up as well, which I think, again, to your point, people get conditioned, and so they kind of want to veer away from this and stick with the certainty, even if it's perhaps unpleasant at times and not.
And limiting and
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I'd not thought of it that way. That's really true, isn't it? So if I give that up, I might give up that, the independence and the creativity and the self-reliance and
Exactly.
yeah.
And then it's like, when you think back again, you never arrive. It's like, okay, cool. Just because that was a strength then doesn't mean it's going to leave me. But okay, like how and where would I want it to show up? If I had to be more deliberate about it, if I was worried it would get lost in the transition of the work and the healing I'm doing or whatever that is. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
All this from showering and washing my hair today. Let's give it up. If you're listening, I tell you what, you're proving.
I get my best thoughts in the shower. Honestly, but just I get out and there's all these voice notes. So
apparently, it's to do with sensory
But,
deprivation. It's part of that. I saw an interview
the hot
with
water on the head or something.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Pharrell Williams where he talked about it, and he said part of it, like his musicality and whatever. But he said he read up on it. He was like, "Why does it always come there?" It's like, I've got no distractions, a sensory deprivation, and it's kind of like,
Interesting.
Yeah.
I remember actually Perry Timms got me onto the old Aqua notes, much as I've never gone that path, but I have a lot of voice notes, even recorded in the shower. Thank goodness the phones are waterproof these days. Way too much information. So you talked about, so you did the counselling and you were at the non-binary. What did you do after that? Where did you, not non-binary, you're being very binary in your 20s.
Yeah.
What quite the opposite. What changed?
So I suppose what changed.
What happened next?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing was like around that point in time of realising, actually, look, you're in progress, whatever happens, and in a you're developing in terms of as a person, the characteristics. So you don't have to be led by your past, but just be conscious of it. It's being important. And secondly was trying to articulate a little bit, and I was trying to think about ways about, okay, I'm going to cringe as I do this. This is the wrong context to use this, but stay with me for a moment. Narrating your work. People talk about it in the people industry, and I believe it as a thing. I think it's really important and very helpful in being of service to your communities. I was trying to think, well, how and where could that show up for what I've experienced?
So you're saying narrating your work. What does that mean then?
So talking out loud about, okay, this is the stuff I'm working through. Okay. Here are my assumptions or solutions I'm going to test or learn from, or I know in the past have worked, and kind of articulating and sharing it. So you see it, a lot on Instagram and LinkedIn when people talk about, this is what I'm. Now, some of it, one end of the spectrum is very full. So like the Insta life, like kind of, got up at 5 a.m., smashed through smoothie and did X, Y, Z. You're like, do one. But then you see other people who've been
I'm so happy for you.
Yeah, exactly. I was asleep, hitting snooze. Then you see it other end of the spectrum. People are like, this is a complex problem or issue I face. Do you have suggestions? Here's my plan of attack anyway, and kind of narrating the experience of it and being vulnerable and doing it.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah, it's like, I think John.
But it's vulnerable as well, isn't it? Because anyone who's got not the fear of being found out, the imposter syndrome, they'd be like, ooh, if I say to Patrick I'm doing this and he laughs at me because I'm doing something wrong,
But it's staggering how it acts as a lightning rod when you start doing it, of people actually are drawn to it to actually either offer their view and help, or actually it resonates, they might be working for it as well. So like borrowing that, I started trying to do kind of like some speaking and talking around it publicly and at events and stuff of organizations. And I did a course with an organization called Nacoa, which is the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. I strongly suggest if anyone has been affected by alcoholism in one form or another in their childhood, I'd check out this organization. Just one, the work they're doing is fabulous, fantastic, and much needed. Two, they've often been put at the fringes of sort of, I suppose, social and political life in the UK. They've struggled as an organisation to get backing and visibility at times for various reasons.
Yet there are so many children of alcoholics.
It's mad, yeah, and it's interesting.
The last guest and my ex-husband, and like I can think of at least 5 off the top of my head.
Yeah, and it's mad. I think this is a good kind of illustration of the challenge around it. Is I'll get the names, the dates wrong, so I won't even bother to try. But there was a point in time when they were doing some government committee meeting where they were trying to present, okay, like, this is kind of what we do and then where we're going with this. This is going back decades. And there was a debate, it's on the record, it's like the notion of, oh, how or why would you support an organisation like this? Because it will generate shame in alcoholics, which might then escalate the problem. And it's like, wait, hang on, no one's looking to shame anyone, but also we do need to have an adult conversation and kind of bring this. And but that kind of illustrates the challenge around the topic area. And what I did was, if anyone's interested as well, you can check out their website for this. They do like training for speakers. If you're interested to like volunteer and go into organizations or bodies or schools, whatever it is, and they'll like, okay, cool. They'll do, it was during COVID we did it, so it was like a bunch of Zoom calls. But I think it works out, it's like a day and a half, 2 days worth of training, workshopping. And they give you like an overview of like the circumstances, the psychology of it. And what I got aside from, feeling more confident to talk about it was also, wait, I recognize some of the cues and clues of my own upbringing. And as well, myself as a persona, like how and where certain behaviors have shown up, and not just like parked like in the context of like stuff around lifestyle and alcohol, but even like general everyday behaviors about how I operate, how I work, how I deal with stress, how I deal with confrontation and so on. And so like, I suppose by trying to narrate the story a bit more around my own experience, what I actually found, I was staggered. I found out a hell of a lot more about myself and kind of how I got to where I was today.
Because I mean, it's all learned behavior, isn't it? You learned coping mechanisms to survive your childhood, and then you took them off into adulthood.
Yeah. And I always do this.
I found when I was started writing The Damage of Words, which has been, I mean, when you talk about I wrote your words down actually. You are in progress. I love that. As I've written it out, I've healed so much more stuff. But just the way I would repeat everything back. Everything I heard that was traumatizing, I just repeat back. And it's the same. And then I would act out the behaviors that I learned to cope.
Yeah.
To use to cope.
And like, again, it's like if you've been in a situation where learned behavior, your expectations for yourself become ingrained, but also your solutions and your approach, which can be good, but also be hugely, hugely limiting. So that was, I suppose,
interesting.
And it was
probably quite unexpected as well, because it sounds like you went on the course really just to learn how to speak about it, and then suddenly you're going, wow, and you learned a lot about yourself, and you probably healed a lot of stuff as well.
It was interesting, and it was interesting because, like, in my background, I run like events and workshops and for learning and leadership. But like when you flip it and have to go back to school, inverted commas, it kind of it's amazing doing that, and then there's such a reflective space as well. And so I'm conscious as well, especially like I'm based out of the UK, Irish citizen, Irish heritage. Like culturally, this stuff is so present in terms of like our everyday lives. But again, to your point earlier, don't really have dialogue or talk around it, despite the fact, as you illustrated there, of like your recent guests and so on, it's prevalent, perhaps in a way perhaps we don't want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's rife, and it's funny because we were talking about where I live, weren't we? And I described it not very flatteringly, and there is so much alcoholism and drug taking. I just like literally outside the front door. I can just walk around the area, and it's just people are suffering, and then they numb because they're not brave. Well, that sounds awful, or they're too scared to speak up and go and get some help, or even just to start with the counselling, whatever the NHS offers, and just start there. And it's scary to do that. It's easier to grab a bottle and numb it and not feel it.
And it's
and that ruins everyone around them. But
it's accessible, it's cheaper, and it's simpler.
Far too accessible.
Yeah. So and also like kind of disclaimer, like I had an upbringing of relative privilege. Like my parents like are brilliant people. But to your point, perhaps they didn't have the resources or systems to support themselves at various junctures in their life. I've got a brother, and like we're super close, and we're both like in the world of work, and kind of he's doing his thing, I'm doing mine. Like relative to some people's experience, that's a success story. So kind of to acknowledge that as well. But like you say, like,
but I think also I found that it was funny. Again, I mean, setting out my story in the first chapter, and I grew up in what would be middle class Sydney, the upper North Shore of Sydney. It's a very wealthy area, big house, had a bed, I had food, I had all of that stuff, and I was emotionally and physically abused. And it was like, but I went to private school. I mean, and look what I've done for myself. And it's funny because I do think a lot of people end up in almost a trauma competition. They're like, well, I'm doing okay, I'm doing well, so I won't deal with the stuff that would make me feel happier and healthier and whole and live longer and not pass on the trauma. And unfortunately, there's just a lot of that generational trauma, but it's there in all the classes and all systems and all, whether privileged or not privileged. And I think whoever it just doesn't feel happy or doesn't feel as happy as they could be, can do something about it and deserves to do something about it. I think that's the other. But I know what you mean, because it was when I was writing it, I wanted to go. I was actually going to put a picture in and then decided not to, but it was like, you can see here what the problem is. Here's me looking very clothed and pretty going off on my first day of kindergarten in front of a huge house, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, didn't mean it didn't happen.
No.
Yeah. And again, and then those children are then having children and can be passing it on. So that's a lot of it. So what did you do after? Have you had other stuff that you've done? I know you've just been through a fabulously long sarcastic job search, which would really impacted, how you feel about yourself and stuff like that. So do you have a toolkit, or have you done more work? What have you been up to?
What I've been up to? So I suppose
I'm always fascinated by what people keep doing.
What I suppose. Did we say this before we started recording or just after? I'm not sure, but we'll circle back around to it anyway. I want to go there, so we'll go there anyway.
Yeah.
So for context, I've been on roughly a 10-month job search, which is
I wish I'd known that earlier. I'm so sorry I didn't know. Literally.
Well, for 5, I mean, it's fixed now, so
LinkedIn,
okay. God, yeah. And the thing I've been doing or realizing is actually community is key. I mean, people go like, your network is your net worth and all that. Yeah, I get it. Like notionally, that it totally makes sense. But also, it's your headspace. I found just when you leave a role or an organization, you're kind of uprooted a little bit from that community, and if it's not of your own choosing in terms of timing or otherwise, it can feel very abrupt and very rough and be like it's
isolating.
Isolating is the word. And so what I've learned and what I found is just being deliberate about reaching out to people to almost with no intent or output from a conversation, and just being willing and hopeful just to kind of, can we just shoot the shit for half an hour on a Zoom call? Like, can we just like talk about nothing? And some of my most, I suppose, recharging moments for my resilience were like weeks where I was like, right, I can't control the market. I can't control the current processes I'm in because, I'm not going to hear back from this time or date or whatever. But what I can do is control, like, how do I feel my day in terms of the people and energy I want to have around me? Now, disclaimer, you do have to kind of accept you're the first thing to get dropped if a competing priority comes through the door. I.e., if you've got a 10 o'clock coffee break lined up with Jim or Sarah down the road at the last place you used to work or wherever it is, if their manager puts in a 10 a.m. at 5 minutes notice, they're not coming to that call. You might not even find out till you're like after the event. So you've got to build up kind of a bit of resilience to that, but I'd say to anyone who's in that situation, keep going and keep reaching out. There is like a approach anxiety I think you develop over time, not just in the context of people, but also application of processes, and you end up not wanting to be seen at points. I'd say, however, wherever you can, be seen, whatever that means to you. I knew when... quick story. So like for my birthday, which is in September, my wife got us tickets to see Jessie.
Virgo, you did tell me that.
Yeah. So, well remembered.
You did write the funniest thing on the little booking form. You're the only person that's ever done that. I loved it.
That's Virgos for you. She got me tickets to see Jessie Ware at the Alexandra Palace. I mean, I've just discovered Jessie Ware over the last couple of years. Massive fan. I remember it generated a lot of anxiety. We got towards the day of the gig. I think it was around October, November time. I was like, hang on a sec, how are we going to get there? How we like if we drive, how much will that cost in petrol? When we get there, can we eat or drink? Like, what's the budget? Yeah, but then the next day we've got other things on, and then I'm like, yeah. And in the end, I got to such a point. I was like, actually, I can't go to this. I don't want to be seen here. I don't want to. And I remember my wife talked to me. She's like, "What is this about? What's going on?" I was like, I was like, I can't do this week. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be seen. And she's like, okay, well, one, allow me, but two, I've got to sell these tickets and no one's going to buy them. And we had to let the tickets go. And I remember thinking the week afterwards, and I didn't go. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, and I went anyway, and it was amazing.
No.
It's when you don't want to go to something and you go.
Being totally real. No, I remember I really put my foot down about it. I really got in a strop about it.
I'm sensing it was about you didn't feel worthy of having that amazing thing happening while you were in the middle of all of this other.
Exactly. Crap. And yeah, I couldn't articulate at the time, but my wife was great. She's like, look.
We don't see our own stuff.
Yeah.
That's why you need a professional.
Yeah. And she's like, look, if you really don't want to go, that's cool. But also, this is for you, regardless of other things going on. Like, you've earned and deserve this. So, like, but I respect your wishes. Because I was like, no, I've got to travel. It'll be a nightmare getting there and back. Blah, blah. All the practical things that there was a solution for just suddenly became mountains that we can
London.
Conquer.
You could have got there.
Anyway. I remember thinking the week after, I was like, hang about, what's this saying or kind of telling me? Well, like, if that's a deliberate choice, cool. But I don't feel happy with the consequence of, like, not seeing this artist who I love. I'm not a big gigger. So this would have been a big deal for me to go anyway.
Believe me, I understand that. I saw Pink in summer. That is the first concert I think I've seen in about 15 years. I literally don't.
I love
her, and I'm going for that.
I would quite happily download the live album of that event and listen to it on repeat. There's like a Queens of the Stone Age at Glastonbury. I love watching that video back. I would dread being there. But I was like, okay, hang on. What does this mean? Is this of service to me, this kind of behaviour? I'm not sure.
No.
And then it's kind of like, I did like a reboot. So that was around like going October into November. I was like, okay, cool. Kind of got to ditch whatever this approach anxiety around this was representing, because it's not, Jessie Ware is not a threat to your life. It's not going to be a negative
It's interesting you call it approach anxiety. So it's like approaching people, which you've been doing through your job search and getting knocked back, I assume, which is where the self-worth.
And it was and it was be almost like, in my mind, I was like, I can't do small talk. I can't, like, there might be some random people you just, like, you do at a gig, you might just start talking to a stranger and get to know, like, it's like, I can't face doing that this over the weekend, like, because I feel like I'm having to pour a lot of energy into that in other activities. By the way, all in good faith on my side, hiring managers, recruiters' side. That's just how it is sometimes.
No.
Go on, counterpoint. I'm here for
You're talking to the woman who is so angry that recruiters, companies, hiring managers ghost candidates. And I'm talking they ghost people who've been in the interview process, which leaves people down and depressed. So actually, no. Many of them do a great job, and many of them don't want to have the conversation they call it displace, I call it reject people. So, but it's actually really interesting to hear. Like, I love that. I shouldn't love the wording, but approach anxiety is really interesting, because we all have that where we're scared to approach somebody. And it's so rare that if you ask somebody for help that they won't give it.
No, exactly.
And a lot of that can also go back for anyone who's had emotional neglect or child abuse or anything like that. When you're hyper independent, it's like, oh, I can't ask for help. Like we were talking before we came on, asking for help for me last year to 51 to finally ask someone for some help, and they said yes. It's like, oh,
It's so funny,
Yes,
isn't it?
work in progress. Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
interesting to your
So,
point, like around the recruiters, not to veer too much into recruitment angle, is like,
mm,
because there's so little you can control, you have to. I had to. My rationale was I have to accept certain truths.
yeah.
So there was like a journal of like these not rules, but observations I came up with that it's going to form like this LinkedIn post in the next month. Is like around things I have to accept, even though they make me unhappy. So, for example, you say about ghosting. Um,
Mm,
I'd been ghosted. I accepted, or my rule or belief was, if you get past first or second stage,
mm.
uh, you could be annoyed to be ghosted after that, but you can't. I can't waste energy being ghosted on first or second stage roles because it's too prevalent. So yeah, to hang on, like not to. It's not a defense
Wow.
of it in any
That's
way, shape, or
no,
form. But I'm
no.
like, okay, how much
Ah,
headspace am I going to allow for a call with an
yeah,
agency or recruiter? So that's stage one, for argument's sake. Stage two might
yeah.
be meeting the hiring manager, and then, but if I don't hear back after that first
Mm,
stage, now in fairness, like very rare the second stage happens where you don't hear something back, one
but
way or
it
the
is,
other over a period of
yeah.
time. But I was like, I was like that first stage, especially like I just gave up chasing
Mm,
certain people. Like I kind of,
yeah.
Laurie
I mean, I guess
Reitman,
like,
I was going to say she's got a great approach for this, where she's like,
yeah.
you can follow up 3 times, six working days at a time. Then after that, just let it go. And that
Mm,
kind of worked for me. I was like, okay, if I'm not getting a response, that's cool. Just park it. In terms of the outcome, it's
yeah.
fine.
I mean, I get if you're dealing with an agency, mind you, that full M because one day you'll be a client. But I'm more thinking if you've spoken to an in-house recruiter, talent acquisition, and then a hiring manager. I mean, to me, if you've had a screening call with an in-house recruiter at a company, you should be getting feedback. Even if it's just an email saying, I'm really sorry, we're not proceeding. Just so you
Yeah.
have closure because we all want closure.
Yeah. And
You
my other
know,
thing is as well, it's like,
certainty it goes back to the beginning when you were talking
yeah,
about certainty.
yeah. And I
Yeah, but
like,
well done you.
yeah, I don't mind a lack of feedback. Just give me the outcome. I
Yeah.
can, I can
Just let me
just,
know to move on.
yeah, exactly. But like,
Because you've still got that little glimmer of hope going on. I mean, it's great that you were able to find a way to deal with that, but you shouldn't have to deal with
I
that.
totally agree. Totally concur. It doesn't feel fair,
Again,
but
hence second business book is coming for the managers to make them understand more about, yeah. Actually, the other thing I want to do is speak at the well, I've been invited to speak at a HR tech event and really talk to these tech providers as well to make sure that they're providing technology that's fit for purpose as well.
mm,
Because not all applicant tracking systems allow someone to get knocked back really easily either. It's all mad. Anyway, I've gone off topic onto my other stuff that I don't want to talk about. I want
all
to talk
good.
about you because you're fabulous. Um, so have you ever gone back and sought like other professional help or done any have you had any interesting experiences where you're like, oh God, that was amazing? Or is it just
It's
really
yeah. So
just
I've done
very
like
expensive of your thoughts?
CBT therapy, cognitive behavior therapy,
Yeah.
via counselors. I think that's been a form of like twice it was declared as part of the format at the start. It's like
Mm,
kind of the counsellor would say like, oh, I'm taking this approach to my
yeah.
counselling, or like I think this would be appropriate. So, but 3 times like I've had a form of counselling. It's interesting as well. Like this might be more of a North American thing. It seems to be like a
Mm,
thread or pattern that people will talk more
yeah.
openly about having a therapist,
Mm,
even in like just as part of almost their like everyday life, even rather than
yeah.
waiting for after the event of a form of tragedy, trauma, otherwise, or challenge. It's almost as part of their routine. But what I found, I suppose, uh, the weight it lifted, especially that first
Hmm.
set of counselling I
Yeah.
had around 2008 or so.
Mm,
And she was fantastic, fabulous. Just in terms of having a sense of the person in front of them, how to be of service. And I'd say to
yeah.
anyone who's considering or pondered it, like getting some counseling resource or help, like absolutely
Mm,
do it. You have no idea where it might take you, and it might
exactly.
challenge your assumptions about yourself.
Mm,
That's a good thing. That's a great
mm.
thing in terms of just to understand yourself better, and it
Yeah,
will
have a
ask a
mirror
lot of
held
you.
up, isn't it? Too.
Yeah, and it's
You're doing this pattern of behavior and, this might be the reason and, it's quite
yeah,
interesting
and
to understand that.
And what I'd say to people as well is like, what you intend to turn up and talk about, if you are going to go there, you might also have to accept is not the thing you'll end up speaking about.
It's never what you talk about.
No, not at all. Not at all. And
I used to find it interesting. I'd get sick before a session as well when it was going to be. So I did a lot of inner child work. And so Michelle Zelly, I mean, she calls herself a coach, but she's got a massive toolkit. So it was always going forward, but we did have to heal the past. But yeah, the inner child work. So if there was going to be a session that was going to actually be particularly healing, it was amazing how often I'd get sick. It was like my subconscious knew, oh, you can't go because this is going to change your life for the better. You can't go because it's a bit scary. So that sort of stuff as well. So I wrote about that in the memoir because I feel that people need to be aware. It's almost like So just...
And again, it's all cues and clues. Like, is this of service and help to you? Cool, crack on, keep going with it.
Just get past the little inner voice that's trying to hold you back and keep you small and safe.
Exactly. And like I just thinking back to those sessions as well. I remember there was one in particular where I came in so, like, I don't describe it, like hot, basically hot and angry right from the start of the session. And I remember it's the only one at that point in time where she's, I can't remember how she worded it or said it, but she was like, okay, how are you getting home after this tonight? Who is aware or understands that you're going home and when you're going to arrive there? And like, because there was a level of kind of like understanding there was something big I was going through at that point in time.
Yeah.
But also, looking back at it, I realized part of what drove that was, and this goes back to your point earlier, it's like the realization of actually, circumstances are one thing, but I feel like I deserve better than this pack of cards I've been dealt. And actually, I definitely was let down inadvertently by certain circumstances, but now I can do something about it, or at least try and move towards something better from that.
Yeah.
And again, like, this is a bit of a
there is no parenting manual. They don't intend to pass all this stuff on or screw their children up. That is
and the thing is as well, like,
so that should almost be a caveat for all these conversations. But if you don't feel great, you can do something about it.
Exactly. And I say that as a parent now, is like, I'm conscious, like, there's stuff I'm doing or points of reference my son is taking from my behavior. It's like, is perhaps not my best self showing up, or not the stuff I'd want him to repeat, but he might end up doing.
Do you think that will encourage you to keep like working through some of that stuff that you'd like to heal from your childhood?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like just like a example is like, for example, journaling is like a thing is very helpful to me. Just first thing in the morning, get out whatever's on my mind, a few sentences, stuff like he's started doing that himself in terms of start reflecting on it. On his own confidence and stuff like that. What does it mean? And
how old is he?
He is 9. He's just turned 9 in November. And it's interesting. You can see certain wheels are turning around identity, self-perception, and self-worth in the school playground and elsewhere. And I think how it's like kind of showing up in terms of like how I want to operate as a parent and a partner to my wife as well is just being conscious and open about, actually, again, work in progress. So just be conscious around, are you happy with the direction of travel you're going in? And if not, do something about it in terms of your own behaviour or speaking to others. And again, it's all kind of like interweaves a bit of what we talked about, the job stuff and other stuff earlier as well. It's like, your world starts to get stressful when it feels small. Therefore, to expand it out, you need to talk to other people, whether that's in terms of just shooting the shit, like I said earlier, or whether it's something more formalized that helps your headspace and lift off the weight off your shoulders. And again, I repeat it, for any men specifically, other people too, of any description, but specifically for men listening to this, there's a hero archetype we're kind of encouraged to buy into, culturally or otherwise. You don't have to be that hero archetype, and actually real courage and heroic behavior is about asking for help as well.
And it is so damaging to self to hold in the emotions. I was interesting again, researching for the memoir was, my dad had heart disease, and I knew he suppressed his anger. And then I saw there's a direct correlation. Suppressing anger leads to heart disease. And you start reading up, suppressing this leads to this, doing this leads to, it's like our bodies will express it somehow. So, just deal with it. Yeah. If anybody would like to chat to you further, or just reach out, LinkedIn, is that, dare I say it? Now they're back off the naughty step.
yeah. That is the spot. That's like probably the only place.
Easiest?
Sorry?
Just the easiest place if I just put a link to your LinkedIn and they can.
If anyone's interested to talk more, it's probably easiest.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you. I think that's really encouraging, isn't it? Just speak up. You talk to people. And also, I think when you were talking about the professionals, often the people you talk to will say, hey, have you thought of talking to someone? Because they know people. Everyone knows people. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So take action. Anyone who's pondering it or listening to this thinking that, treat it as like an experiment. No, there's no like success or failure. You're just experimenting to see where this might take you. Take action.
And if you're happy to look after your physical health, why not your mental health?
Exactly that.
It's just a no-brainer, isn't it? Oh, thank you so much, Patrick.
Not at all.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Damage of Words. How brave, how vulnerable. All to inspire listeners like you to take a step or inspire others to take a step. Imagine what healing we could create if we normalise this conversation. So please pass this on and of course subscribe so we can do just that. Until next time, thank you.